The first snow of winter drifted down outside the high windows of Alderford Keep, each flake spiraling lazily before vanishing against the dark stone ledges. Meltwater ran in fine silver threads toward the courtyard, pooling in shallow frozen puddles. Beyond the glass, the north tower loomed as a black shadow against the pale sky. Inside, the air was warm and still, heavy with the scent of beeswax and pine logs burning in the great hearth. Every so often, the fire popped, sending a faint echo down the long gallery where carved lions, vines, and crowns danced in the flickering light. Isabel often came here to think. The gallery felt like a place suspended between time and silence. She stood with her silk wrap loose over her shoulders, the fabric slipping to reveal the pale curve of her back. A soft shiver touched her skin, not from cold, but from the stillness, the way the air seemed to listen. She turned and saw him. Thomas stood at the far end near the great carved doors, one hand resting over his chest as if steadying his breath. His deep velvet coat caught the light in dark folds, trimmed in fur at the cuffs. He should not have been there, not in that part of the keep, and not in that hour when the family gathered in the hall below. "You should not be here," she said, her voice steady though her heartbeat quickened. "And yet," he replied quietly, "I am." At Alderford, love was never a private matter. It was a contract, weighed in land, coin, and alliance, with affection considered a pleasant but unnecessary accident. Isabel had been told in early autumn she would marry Sir Godfrey in the spring, a man 20 years her senior, courteous but distant, who looked at her as one might regard a valuable tapestry. He was not cruel nor unkind, but he would never truly know her. Thomas was different. The son of a merchant from the southern coast, he served as her father's steward and understood the moods of the keep, how the north wind made the walls sing, how the hens laid more eggs when the kitchen gate was left open. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried weight. The first time they spoke alone had been in the library, when she was searching for a book of poems her mother once read aloud on summer evenings. Thomas had found it for her, its leather cracked, smelling faintly of lavender, and placed it in her hands without a word. Something unspoken had passed between them in that silence. Now in the gallery, his presence felt both impossible and inevitable. The great hall below rang with laughter and the clatter of dishes. But up here, the only sounds were the crackle of the hearth and the sigh of the wind through the tall stained glass windows. "You'll bring trouble," she warned. "I have lived with trouble all my life," he replied, "but there are some troubles worth the risk." She looked away, knowing the rules of Alderford were as sharp as the winter air. A glance held too long, a voice warmed too much. These things traveled faster than snowmelt in the courtyard drains. "Tell me why you came," she said at last. "Because," Thomas answered slowly, "you will be gone in the spring, and I cannot pretend it does not matter." Her breath caught. "You speak as though it is your choice to make." "It is not my choice," he admitted, "but it is my heart, and I will not see it caged without knowing it ever beat freely." She hesitated, her fingers tracing the embroidered edge of her wrap. If her father knew, if Sir Godfrey even suspected, the cost would be great. "What would you have me do?" she asked. "Nothing rash," he said. "Nothing that would bring you harm. But if there is even a single day before you are gone, let it be ours." They chose the feast of St. Agnes, when the keep would be alive with guests and music, and their absence would go unnoticed. On the appointed day, the air was bright and brittle, snow crunching beneath their horses' hooves as they rode through the forest to the old mill by the river. The mill wheel was frozen solid, boards groaning under the weight of ice. Inside, the air was still and cold, smelling faintly of dry grain. Dust floated in pale shafts of light from the broken windows. Here there were no servants, no echoing steps, no doors opening and closing, only quiet. They spoke little, needing no words. Every glance, every brush of a hand carried meaning. They sat by the river, watching thin sheets of ice drift past in the slow current, a bird's cry echoing from deep in the forest. Hours passed without urgency, as if time itself had decided to rest. For Isabel, it was the first time she had felt wholly herself, not the Lady of Alderford, not the promised bride of Sir Godfrey, but simply a woman beside a man who saw her as she truly was. Yet a day is only a day. Dusk came, and with it, the ride back. The sun sank behind the hills, the snow in the forest glowing faintly in the blue twilight. At the edge of the courtyard, they stood for a moment in the shadow of the walls, the muffled sounds of the feast spilling from the hall. "Did it matter?" Thomas asked. "Yes," she said. "It will matter all my life." Spring arrived quickly. Snow melted into the earth, and the trees budded with pale green leaves. Isabel's wedding was held in the chapel, vows spoken before family and neighboring lords. Sir Godfrey's hand was warm but impersonal in hers. She smiled when expected, stood where she was told, and settled into the quiet sameness of a life chosen for her. Yet in her heart, there was still the mill, the frozen river, and the memory of Thomas's voice saying, "One day." Years later, she often walked the gallery alone, sometimes pausing near the carved doors where she had first seen him that winter evening. She would remember the way he had looked at her, not as a prize to be won or a name to be joined to his, but as a person worth knowing. It was not the sort of love Alderford Keep approved of. It was not a story for the hall, but it was hers. And in a place where love was so often weighed and traded, that was worth keeping.